Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of Keeping It 110. I'm so excited to be back with you guys this week. I know we took off last week as our city was making their voices heard for some of the devastating news that we heard come out of Minneapolis. So thank you guys for joining us. Please know, we have been, in addition to, making our voice heard, taking a stance around the things that we believe in. We also find it very important to take care of ourselves, right? It's a lot of work to consistently see our brothers and sisters and people of color consistently be taken advantage of and killed by the individuals who are supposed to be taking care of us. So not only does that interact and interfere with us personally, having to get out there every day, protesting, making our voices heard, also takes a toll. So I want to urge each of you guys that as you are doing this work, also take care of yourselves. Take a day. To reflect, to read, to go on a walk, to do what you need to do, because this is a marathon, right? And we need every single one of you guys to be well in multiple ways as we consistently fight for equity, as we continue to fight for our lives to matter, as we continue to fight for the boys and girls of color who attend schools in our city and schools across the country. So thank you guys so much for supporting the work of Project OneTen. That is what we are here to do. We want to create a space where we are able to affirm, to believe, to develop, to see, and to support the well-being of Black and brown boys here in the city of Chicago. Over the past week, we've called and checked in on our students and their families just to kind of see how they were doing, how they were feeling. And I'm just really excited, although we had to cancel last week, to be joined by an amazing guy, someone who I have gotten to know through a group that we're part of, the My Brothers Keeper Alliance, through the Obama Foundation here in Chicago. And from, of course, prior to us meeting, I've heard the name, Maurice Swinney. Of course, he's the Chief Equity Officer of Chicago Public Schools. But when we actually were able to be in community with one another, I was just in awe and truly inspired to see the work that he's doing here in the city of Chicago on behalf of all of us. So very quickly before I bring him on, I know this has been a ongoing journey of us having these Keeping It 110 events, but here are the remaining conversations that we are going to have. We had an amazing conversation with Christina from the Erickson Institute. We also today are going to be talking with Dr. Maurice Swinney, and then next week will be our final Keeping It 110 conversation with Robert Hendricks and Tamisha Webb. They both are amazing educators and leaders in the Boston area. So make sure that you join us next week as we end our Keeping It 110 conversations. For those who are with us, shout out in the comments. Where are you guys viewing from? How are you doing? Let us know. And then we'll do that, and then I'll introduce Dr. Swinney, and we'll get started. All right. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to bring on Maurice. Throughout the conversation, if you have questions, things that are interesting to you, write them in the comments. That's where we're going to be pulling our questions from. That's where we're going to be pulling our questions from today. So continue to put in your questions there. The second thing is to continue to share out our conversation today throughout your network on Facebook. I will say we are experiencing some weather here in the city of Chicago, so hopefully Wi-Fi is not interrupted. I was just talking with Maurice, and we have a standby just in case. But without further ado, I want to introduce Maurice Swinney, who is the Chief Equity Officer of Chicago Public Schools. Amazing guy doing amazing work. And I'm going to allow him to share a little bit more about some of the work that he's doing. It looks like I froze a little bit, guys. I'm so sorry. So hopefully this doesn't continue. Can you see me? Okay. Okay, cool.
You're not frozen on this end.
Okay, okay, cool. Maybe it's just my computer, but now everyone can see and hear you, Maurice. So thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing? How's your day been?
My day has been busy, and I am okay. Okay is not perfect, to be honest. Um, since we're keeping it 110, right?
There
I
you
think
go.
the racial incidents that have occurred over the last couple of months, or really month or so, have been extremely impactful on myself, and I'm sure you and many other people of color, especially when we live in a world where anti-blackness, or live in a country where anti-blackness is sometimes blatantly and explicitly seen. And so, to be honest, but I'm feeling better. Like, this conversation is good for me. You know, I'm, one of the things about Black people that I really love about us is that we find ways for healing and celebration through our music, through our art,
Yeah,
through our cooking that goes all the way back to the African homeland. And so I just really appreciate sort of pulling on that ancestral root of finding joy and love in all things. So I'm okay, but I'm good. Good to see you, man. Good to
yes,
see
yes,
you.
yes, yes. Thank you so much. What is one thing that you've been doing to kind of like, well, not one thing, maybe it's multiple things. What's something that you've been doing to, as I was sharing earlier, as we continue this fight of fighting for equity and justice for our people, it's often tiring, and it's a marathon, right? We have to continuously take care of ourselves. So, how do you take care of yourselves as you deal with and do some of the hard work that you're doing?
Yeah, I would say first, I do find time to sit still. I find time to sit quietly for a few minutes and allow my brain to sort of organize all of these thoughts as much as possible. I also write a lot, so I'm good at like picking up my phone, typing notes, thoughts and ideas that I have. I have a therapist that I've been seeing since my father died in 2016, so I have that way of addressing my emotional, roller coaster sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
I love to cook. I don't cook as much as I used to, but I'm from New Orleans originally, so I like to throw down, man. I like to have good food. That's one thing. And my friends and I, we have a Zoom every Saturday at 6 p.m. And so we're always a Zoom or a Google Meet or whatever platform we use, or FaceTime. We find ways to connect, and so it's really good and it's really fun to connect with them and to really, really, enjoy the presence of people who look like you, who want to see you be awesome at the things you do. So those are some of the ways.
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. So, of course, I remember when we first had our first conversation, we realized that we shared, you know, well, I mean, I'm not from New Orleans, but I lived in New Orleans. But it was, I still to this day say, one of the most amazing experiences that I had teaching in New Orleans because I felt like I was adopted by some of the like older women teachers, and
Yeah.
they literally would cook for every meeting, every occasion. Be like, "Oh, Derek, I was thinking of you. I made you a pot of gumbo, or come over for some crawfish." When I tell you that year, I probably gained quite a few pounds from
Yeah.
eating all that great New Orleans food.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm from the city, and when I started teaching, it was the same thing. Miss Nzinga was the math teacher who was right next to my class, and I was a middle school English teacher, so
Mm,
she was a math, and we were teaming. And I tell you, man, she loved to cook, and I loved her leftovers.
Yes,
So
yes,
my first year teaching, you're trying to figure out how to manage life as a full-time adult. And she was just great at making sure I had all the things that I needed.
yes.
So I hear you.
That's what's up.
I hear you.
What part of the city, New Orleans, are you from?
I grew up in Carrollton. I lived in the St. Thomas projects with my family as well. So I actually moved around. I grew up around Xavier University where I went to college.
Cool.
As a young person, I used to ride my bike over there. And I was like, I'm going to go to school here. And eventually I did that. But I also lived in the St. Thomas projects. You know, it was actually, when all that would be happening, it was a beautiful time in my life. And also then we moved to the Gentilly area. For those who are out there who know anything about New Orleans.
Right. I used to get my hair cut in Gentilly near Dillard. Um,
Yeah,
yep.
quite a few stops over there.
Cool. That's what's up. But no, that is always a fond memory for me. This weekend, the weather was really nice,
Hmm.
and I was just thinking, like, man, I wish I could just sit on the porch and have like some crawfish, go get like a snowball, like turn on some music, and just have like a great time.
One day you'll get to
Right,
visit again.
right. Definitely. But awesome. So, I mean, we kind of went through a little bit of your, biographical, how you got to where you are. But for those, who aren't familiar with you, let us know, like, how did you end up where you are today, being from New Orleans? How did you end up in Chicago? And then how did you make it to, CPS, being the chief equity officer?
Yeah. So I'm maybe almost 20 years. I think 19 years in public education. Started off in high school in the Future Teachers Club. One of my teachers told me because I like to talk so much, she would put me in the Future Teachers Club, and I always tell her now we're still connected. I say the rest is history. So I graduated from Xavier University in English education, followed by my master's in ed administration. And I was a teacher, a middle school teacher, and I also was an instructional coach, then an assistant principal. And around the time of Hurricane Katrina, I had moved right outside of New Orleans to Ascension Parish,
Mm.
um, county for other people, but Ascension Parish, and I was freshman principal. And then at some point, I was inspired by some of Chicago's poets from Louder Than a Bomb, Nate Marshall and Demetrius. I can't believe I'm about to screw up your last name. Last name starts with the A. But both of them they did a poem. It's on YouTube, and it's called A Lost Count. And at the time, I was figuring out like I wanted to live in a different city. I wanted to, all of my friends had moved to all of the major cities around the country. And so I feel like I was one of the last birds out of the coop. Um, and so I saw their poem on HBO and I watched it over and over and over again. And then I just said, I'm going to move to Chicago. And so I called CPS one day to say, what does it take to be a principal in Chicago public schools? And they told me. And so I went online and I did all the stuff and I worked on my certification and all of the things that I needed to do. And honestly, my path honestly was extremely easy. When I tell people, I follow my dream. Usually when I want to do something, I try to put in as much work to get there. And so I flew out for interviews. And then I wanted to be the principal of a school where there were some complex issues. And I wanted an opportunity to connect with multiple communities. And Tilden was a school I call Tilden was one of the loves of my life when I really so appreciated being the principal at Tilden for 6.5 years. And then around that time, I was really learning more about equity work. I was doing some work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, ACT, and other organizations. I was a part of the Network for College Success, Emojin. So I'm getting these relationships established while also recognizing there are some critical equity issues. And I remember when Dr. Jackson visited my school and wanted to learn more about, how I was addressing social emotional learning in my school. She was just very thoughtful about how she would give me the supports and, that I needed. And so when I saw she became the CEO, I was like, okay, I want that job
Yeah.
while finishing my dissertation, which was focused on the relationship factors between parents and caregivers and their young people who graduated after re-enrolling or dropping out a second time and really understanding the nuances of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applied, I went after it. And I believe that those of us who have experienced inequity are very much brilliant enough to help to solve for the larger issues that we're facing within our city and within our country. That's the short version.
No, that's a pretty amazing story. I think, oftentimes when I talk with people about like their journeys and how they got to kind of where they are, one of my mentors shared with me very early on. It may have been Carmita, with so I was a part of Surge. And she said, if anyone like tells you their story of how they got to where they are, and it's like this upward trajectory, right? Like, there's oftentimes those points and moments in someone's story, that you can oftentimes learn more from than just this. I did this, I did this, I did that, I did that. But definitely appreciate like the intentionality of like, I have this dream, I know what I want to do, and I'm gonna work and make it happen. I know one of the things you told me when we talked before was about, a lot of people said it was going to be very hard to enter into being a principal in CPS, and how it was fairly, easy. You were able to like succeed at that. Can you tell us a little bit about like that experience?
Yeah, I think two things. I think it's important to, I grew up very black with black excellence and believing that my black was brilliant.
Yeah.
And so my family and my teachers always pushed me to say, you can figure it out. And so I have this sort of like, I like enigmas or things that are sort of like puzzling and figure out and to figure out. But what I also knew is take the steps that are outlined, put together your presentation, talk from what you know, share the data,
Yeah.
and then that will sort of help to build the muscle around what I knew because I didn't know anybody in Chicago. I had never visited Chicago. Eventually, so your first guest, Cesare Warren, was the first person that I actually knew. And one of my friends connected me with Chaz. I said, hey, I'm considering moving to Chicago and I don't know anybody. And then he introduced me to Dr. Warren, Cesare, at the time. And his family, his mom lived in New Orleans. So we had a great connection. And I
Yeah.
was like, okay, this is a good sign for me
Yeah.
to make a move. And it was also important for me to like follow my own journey. And I am also a poet, so I like to write in prose. I actually wrote about George Floyd's death, and I'm and so many others in prose and in poetry. And that's the sort of way that I write and reflect.
Got you.
So their words, I tell people, they are the reason I moved here. And I, had dinner with them eventually. They were like, they're grown now. It's been 10 years ago. But I said, nobody recruited me to Chicago except for the young people who had the poem.
Yeah.
Words are inspiring, and just like we see young people using their voices in their words right now. So,
Definitely. I think like if I could think of a dream job, I feel like your role is just like an amazing opportunity to push and challenge and create and educate people on how to what we talked about at the very beginning to see, affirm, believe, and have systems in place that sees every student. Um, Hilarious story. So you did the a part of CPS. You rolled out the equity framework on kind of like
yeah.
where what your office had created.
Uh-huh.
And in your like welcome speech, you said, so thankful to see everyone like who was invited, and then other people who were not invited, but you're here. Thank you for coming. I was one of those people. I wasn't invited, and when I tell you, I was like, I'm gonna just come. I'm gonna just sit in the back. Like I'm gonna just kind of hear. They sat me at the table with Dr. Jackson, and I'm like, oh my God. Like, of all the days, I'm sneaking into this event, and they sit me at the very front. But, I mean, the stuff that you guys shared, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about, an amazing work. So, just to kind of get us started on that, right? When we think about like equity, what does that mean? Oftentimes, like people have a really hard time understanding the difference between equality equity, justice, like all these terms that sound and are put together oftentimes, but really
Hmm.
mean very different things. So could you share with us, like, what does that look like for you, and how does your office define it, and how are you guys working to build frameworks in schools?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to think about is the real reality that not everyone is starting off at the same point, but is expected to get to the same point as they finish line.
Yeah.
Meaning, we want everyone to graduate from high school. We want everybody to have a post secondary opportunity that leads to like long life, great citizenship, all of those sort of beautiful aspirational things. But when we look at the historical conditions that have been happening, not only in the city of Chicago, but across the country, when you think about how Black people are situated, how our Latinx community are situated, Indigenous people, LGBTQ, like we have to be honest about not everybody has the same starting point. And so what equity says is that we know people don't have the same starting point. Therefore, we must respond differently in order to get them to whatever that end goal is. And sometimes we might need to adjust what the end goal is based on like the collective wisdom and what people want for themselves. And so that is what our office, the Office of Equity, seeks to do. And, you know, when I first started, Dr. Jackson really kind of, if I can narrow it down, she wanted three things: a 5-year vision, like what are we aspiring for as a district, and how do we make that public, that we as an organization know what we want for our students.
Yeah.
The second thing was a framework that really gets at what is the ways in which we need to think, act, be, in order to advance equity in every space. So a classroom space, a school, a network, the district in relation to community. And then the last thing was like, how do we do better at engaging our stakeholders? And how do we make sure that stakeholder voice is not the add-on, but she talked a lot about collaboration. And so what you've seen so far is a 5-year vision, that came out, and then we introduced a draft of the CPS equity framework. And the framework, the final draft is coming soon, but I won't say the date because the last time I said the date, it didn't come out at that time because I was too meticulous. And I was like, it's not ready yet, gang. We haven't taken some people's feedback into it, but
Yeah.
just know that the framework and the tools, those are coming. And then the last piece is like, we really want to get better at stakeholder engagement. But to the point around to defining equity, and what we've done in the second version and the full version of the framework is really to push on racial equity, to advance that in what we're writing. Because whether we look at any particular stakeholder group, African American, Black people are at the bottom in most of the data results. And that is not because people are inadequate, inferior. It is because there have been some historical things that have happened that should not have happened. And we need to rectify those to create the healing and the trust that are needed to better support our young people.
Yeah, definitely. If I'm thinking back to when my first year as a teacher, and you know, as a first year teacher, you make some mistakes, and you have to you have to remove yourself from what you are used to and the education that you receive, because oftentimes you're like, who is that teacher persona? I think about oh my god, the name is like literally on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, this one teacher, she was my AP English teacher,
Uh-huh.
and Lord Jesus, she was Miss Jordan, Anita Jordan, Townview High School. So when I became a teacher, I was like, okay, this is the persona that I want, right? And realizing, you know, when you know better, you're supposed to do better. So I could not be the same teacher as she was.
Uh-huh.
But I know that I did a lot of harm, specifically to students in our diverse learner population, right? I just didn't quite understand differentiation and what that meant. You know, I was on this whole equality thing, right? Like, we all are getting the same education. We all should be able to meet the same goal. But what you're talking about is, you know, we have to realize where certain people are. We don't need to we don't need to make the goal smaller. We don't need to, you know, we all should have the same goal, but how we get there may look a little different. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so the one of the reasons why we have a sort of free and public education is because Black people have been pushing for that I mean, we know all of the Brown versus Board, even before that, right? Access to education. And we also knew that our ancestors knew that in systems of oppression, people opportunities either weren't given or have been taken away.
Yeah.
And so when we think about when I first started teaching back in 2001, or yeah, I think it was 2001 when I first started teaching, I realized now that the way in which I thought about school, as much as I was like Black, you know, loving myself and understood Black history and Black culture, I had also assimilated in some way to, you know, white supremacy culture or structural racism in ways that people, I don't even think we fully know, and we're still trying to unlearn. And what that means, honestly, is there are ways in which we have associated or assimilated to the point that we have lost some of our identity. That's a part of it. And then the other side, brain science actually tells us that the way in which we learn and the way in which we think was not playing out in the way we were taught. So when you started, differentiation was the thing when we started, right? But even before that, it was like multicultural education. And then after that, it was cultural competence. And so it keeps sort of hinting at what we should be doing. And the question was always, why aren't we actually doing it? And I think we were not really thinking about what does it mean for people who have been historically underserved or didn't have access to now get access and get the right resources and support that they need so that they can thrive. And so that, you know, yes. No, I talked to some of my former students, you know, many of them are still grown. That was like 20 years ago. One of the things that they taught me that I did do well was I helped them to write. Writing was essential to articulating their thoughts. And so, you know, there is some grace there, but I also think they will always remember if a teacher loved them or not. That is what they will remember.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of my former students are now, you know, a little older now too. And as I see them, just like, so my last group graduated high school this year. One of the guys I used to teach, his mom reached out to me and was like, "Mr. Butler, look at Domingo and all he's done." I'm just like, oh my God, like this is crazy. I was a horrible teacher for him, but I'm glad that he's doing well. Doing well now. But you know, you live, you learn, you grow, and that's the point. When you know better, you do better.
But I would say even with that, sometimes we described ourselves as being horrible, and young people don't have that view of us.
True.
But I think that is because we have this love to always be better and to grow. And so I say that to say they will remember how we treated them. And I will say that I made it a point to treat them well. That was important for me.
Definitely.
And I'm sure the way you describe yourself and the way I've seen you, you care about people. And the work that you're doing now with Project 10 is pretty dope. So
cool. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think they would definitely agree with that. But the next question would be like, when you think about this whole equity thing, like it almost seems as if like, you know, in giving someone more, somebody has to be getting something taken away, right? Like if we're trying to reach this goal and we now are kind of opening up all these resources, investing more in diverse learners, investing more in schools with majority Black and brown students. Some people may feel like, well, you know, why are you taking away from me? This has nothing to do with me right now. What has been kind of conversations that you've had? Because I know you guys have done a lot of like focus groups and town halls, and I know you all have gotten a gamut of conversation. So what has been your kind of message around that?
So believe it or not, I always have this framework around because I'm always talking from it. So the pink area, which is called liberatory thinking. And what people are usually balk about is resource equity, right? So they're thinking about, you know, I feel like I'm losing something. And sometimes when you've always had, the moment you feel like you've lost something, it feels hard. And we see that as people, you know, the previous marches were about open up the stores so we can get haircuts, you know, because it feels like oppression when you don't have the thing that you've always had. And I think it has been important for me to talk about equity is not a zero-sum game like you think you lose. The question that I'm always asking is, what do people actually need? And how do we make sure we are responding to the needs? And we know our young people need more in some cases because they have been historically underserved.
Right.
And what I mean by that, it's not even about intent, it's about impact. Like what actually happened, not what we intended to do, but what actually happened. And when you read the history of America, not even just Chicago, America, we know, and I have used the history to help to articulate why we're making necessary moves. Because I don't think people know. I think a part of it is when you think of American history, we grew up thinking cowboys and Indians were like friends hanging out. You know what I'm saying? And that was not what that was.
Yeah.
And we didn't learn that a Native American black man created a potato chip,
Mm.
George Crumb. Like, so every time you eat a potato chip, remember that an African American, Native American man made that. Right? We don't learn the ways in which we have been always doing mathematics and chemistry and science.
Yeah.
But just to get back to your point, a part of what I've been doing is expressing the history so that people have a greater understanding. You know, a lot of my white friends have reached out lately, and I've been pushing them to read Robin DiAngelo's book around white fragility to better understand the historical way in which some people have benefited from systems and others have not. And we have to really reconcile that level of history. And when other people flourish, we all flourish. And we believe in the idea that you start with the group that is furthest from the goal. And that's why we have to make some of those. And I will say that there are a lot of allies out there who are also taking up this work to continue to push thought around this thing.
Yeah. I love that. And I think, that goes really into the next point that I want to kind of talk about is like where we are now, like, June 9th, 2020. Seen 2 weeks of just unrest, 2 weeks of protest, 2 weeks of folks shouting and protesting, wanting our voice, our bodies, our everything to matter, right? And I read this article earlier today. It was written by Tanisha Peoples. She's a current surge. I always struggle with surge person in surge. There we go. And one of the quotes that really stuck out to me, the article is called "America Has to Take Its Knees Off the Neck of Public Education Too." And over this whole time, I've heard from just educators, specifically where I work, talking about, beyond like protesting and donating, not really sure like what their role is in this movement. But I think it's very clear. It's very clear in education and public education specifically what the role is. And I'm gonna read this quote because it really stuck out to me. It says, "Black kids can't breathe in schools. They're victims of racism, bias, funding inequity, and so many other injustices that by the time many of them reach high school, they're knowingly or maybe even unknowingly suffocating from inaccessibility to opportunity and overall the American dream." And this too is layered in our larger push for justice, humanity, and equality. What that just really hit home to me. I think it was the visual of like by the time they reach high school, they're suffocating, right? Because of the inaccessibility to opportunity and overall the American dream. I think a lot of schools do a lot of great work in creating those opportunities and creating those spaces, but in the grand scheme of things, right, there is just so much funding inequity, resource hoarding, that doesn't allow for our students to be able to breathe, to be able to dream, to be able to see themselves. So I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that, and what has been your approach to this?
Yeah, one of the good questions. So first, I did skim the article. She's a great thought leader. Um, in that she is very, I love her stance around equity because, excuse me, I also think she wrote something else. I have to go back and see. But the way she described, her beautiful black talent was showing, right? Like when you think of a child suffocating in school, that grips you, that
Right.
should cause some level of anguish.
Yeah.
Um, and so when you read that aloud, it was like, yes. And I might even read to you a little something that I wrote. I'm gonna see how I. But what I will say, so one of the reasons why we launched a school funding working group in CPS back in the winter was because communities have ideas on what it takes to solve this financial issue that we have.
Yeah.
And we know that schools and families there are some families who deserve and need more, and we owe it to them to do that. So this, in the current grant, like we have some equity grants that we've given, provided to schools who would have seen a shift in enrollment. We also created, I think it was 100 positions for many of the schools. There are probably more west who have been historically underserved. And what we did was we used the UIC Economic Hardship Index as a way to bring in external community data to better make decisions around where we need to invest people time and money. And so even as we think about the capital improvement work, like how do we invest in buildings around the city, CPS buildings, we're building some equity factors to make sure that the money is not just going everywhere, but that it's responding to some critical needs that are important to students and families. And she's right. We have to invest more. It's one of the reasons I'm watching. We do have what was it, $2 billion shortfall. That's crazy to me. And before I moved to Chicago, I was already studying that Illinois was one of the least funded districts. But also when we think about our suburban counterparts, like they have better school funding rates, right? And so there is so much to talk about. I'm reading this book now called Regional Equity. I think that's the name of it. It's from a professor at Harvard, and what she talks about is the relationship between cities, suburban, and rural areas, and thinking about funding. It's a fascinating book to read, but we do have to have more funding. And I also think it's important for anybody out there, our philanthropic community, investors, to make sure that we're putting money in the schools that need support and not just schools, where we think things are already set up and young people are doing well. And what I think she is also pointing out in the article, at least the way I see it, we have to do a better job with ensuring that we are paying attention to data as young people move through the system. And we've been working on that too.
I think.
And in the 5-year vision, we call out, we got some pushback on when we said that we would basically over the next 5 years really pay attention to our African American and Latino students within the district, our boys and young men of color. And people were like, well, what about girls? And I said, girls are important. We're not saying that they're not. But when we look at the data, when we see the disparities, we have some large disparities. And we also know that disparities can change depending on the student group. So we got to make sure we're paying attention to that.
Yeah. The other piece I know we talked a little bit about prior to jumping on, also related to kind of what we're currently seeing, is teachers or people in education not really understanding their role beyond, what's happening now, protests, marching, those types of things. I think the book White Fragility and really interrogating white privilege in general, right? And realizing that it's not enough just to be like against racism, but had to really work to be anti-racist. And when we think about like the Central Park situation with like Amy Cooper, right? This quote really stuck out to me, again, from Tanisha Peoples' article. It says, if schools put forth the effort and resources to better support and understand Black students, they know that what's often interpreted as disciplinary issues or learning deficits is actually a lapse in cultural competency amongst their staff. Um, wow,
Yeah.
wow, right? What tools, what things do you all provide in your office to help teachers truly understand their privilege, understand where they have opportunities to grow in this cultural competency, and then finally how to move from just against racism to being anti-racism in every aspect of their classroom as well as systems that are within the school.
Got it. Okay, let me parcel that out with um,
My bad.
we
That was
no, it's fine. So in the framework, one of the reasons why we wanted to build a framework is because we wanted something to be in the room when no one else is present to help people start on this serious unlearning journey
yeah.
in order to learn, right? We created what's called a liberatory thinking tool that is going to be released soon to help people even understand themselves and start to do that mirror and window work. So we, in the equity work, we say there are windows and mirrors. Mirrors is I'm going to take the opportunity to hold up the mirror to myself
Mm.
to understand my privilege, my bias, my positionality in the society, my wellness, while at the same time looking out the window to understand other people's perspectives, cultures, and identities. And without that deep work that we have, that ongoing work that we have to do, we won't actually advance equity in the way that we need to. That's why we say you need all four dimensions. You actually need all four of these areas operating at the same time to advance equity. So there is that. There is a companion guide that's coming out with a framework that's going to help to get to some more concrete actions that people can do. But I will say it's important right now that people do their work. And we have some supports, but I push people on. Everybody can Google. So you can look up culturally responsive teaching. I can still send you articles and give you things to do. And actually, I will do more of that. We're kind of in this wonky little time right now when we're responding to two pandemics at the same time. But really, really to address these issues. And so there are some supports coming. We just, without getting ahead of myself, there are some supports coming to support people on that journey. But I do recommend that people do what I call the mirror work. Like, if your young people every year are having issues with your relationship, then you have to hold up the mirror to yourself and understand what is it about me that is causing some of the issues that are happening in my space, whether it's a classroom space, whether it was the principal's office, because that's important. I remember a student cussed me out my first year teaching.
Isn't that
she
all
did a really good job. And then when she walked out of the door, I was like, go to the discipline office. The voice inside myself said, remember, you did that in ninth grade. And then it brought me back to my conversation with Miss Strickland, who is still one of my favorite teachers today. But the culturally responsive teaching has three elements. One, it does some identity work. It recognizes history. And there is a social political consciousness. And we have to, what you see young people doing right now with protests, or is an example of a cultural political consciousness. In other words, that young people should be equipped to act to disrupt current systems and not just taught history to say this is what people did.
Right.
And to understand people of color contributions in multiple spaces and understanding that work. So that's a little bit, but some supports and things are coming. Right now, we're really focused as a district on responding to how do we reimagine, how do we think about school coming into play very soon.
Gotcha. Last point on this. So one of my friends works at a tech company here in the city and was very dissatisfied with the statements that everybody's putting out right around what's going on. And challenged kind of leadership just around what they said, what are they actually doing to like make sure this happens, how are they rethinking like the talent pool, those people that are in leadership, like all of these things, right? And all of a sudden he became like the de facto DEI coordinator for this company, right? Without there truly being like real resources, support, all these things, right? Granted, like that's your job, and you get paid to do that, right? But what happens like when Black people are working in spaces where it's like well, I want to learn, like, teach me, show me, like, what should I read, like, do all these things. And it's like, I love the point you made earlier. Like, everybody can Google, like, everyone, it's work that you have to do. So, how do you kind of like solve for that dissonance between not, holding the hands of white people, right, in times like this, but also holding them accountable to learn? Like, how do you, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think everybody has to talk to everybody to some degree, right? Like my close friends know I am going to say, do your work.
Yeah,
And I just really, for them, this has been the book. I said, like, you have to do your work. And we can't ask people of color to carry an emotional tax in the middle of their trauma.
yeah,
We cannot do that.
yeah,
You can find TED Talks. There's enough YouTube videos to even understand what white privilege is. Like there are ways, and I think it's okay to tell people you need to go look that up or Google this, give some direction. And there's also like there is an opportunity for people who you feel like are coachable or are really open to have genuine conversations.
yeah,
But if you know that the relationship is already somewhat or pseudo contentious, I wouldn't sort of step into that. When I think about, so here's where I pushed on some people. There are lots of companies who are putting out statements and not talking to the black people on their staff.
yeah,
That's problematic.
yeah,
Which sounds like capitalism, right? Let me protect what we say the organization upholds, but not actually do the right investment.
yeah,
And what I have been saying to some of my counterparts who, number one, find healing in the way that you know black people can heal. Like you have to sort of sometimes pull out of that, get with your people and cause and do that space. And then lean on your allies. Like I've directed some of my, like one of my white female friends, she's like, send them to me. Okay,
yep,
done.
yep,
Because I don't want to get the misconception that black people can't pause to heal or to address the traumas that we're facing. Like there's a lot I would love to say in post, but I had to take a step back, right? Like a part of this, I still had to work every day
yep,
to constantly make sure I'm responding to principles. You know, people really want, there's some people who genuinely want to do this work. And at the same time, I realized I couldn't be so busy that I didn't allow myself space to breathe and to heal and to pause. I don't care what my title is, I'm still Maurice,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and giving space for that. What I will say, I guess to more pointedly answer your question, though, is that I think um, to give people their assignment to do their own work, and if you have a collection of articles and things to read, to do that. And one of my white friends, she said that when she was interviewing for a job, or she read on a blog somewhere that, you know, one question that a white person can ask the people was, or is, tell me about the diversity of your staff,
mhm,
to push on the need for diversity. So she's been finding ways to make those connections. And I think for people who are, you know, who are allies in this work, I so appreciate the way our Latinx community has been showing up.
yeah,
You know, there was a moment of, there was a possible tension, and we have black and brown leaders really just sort of step up and say, that's not what we're about to do.
mhm,
We're going to focus on this in the same way, you know, like I think it's important for us to focus on and support people during DACA, you know, or when we had all the craziest stuff with kids in cages, right? Who are coming from like Guatemala and other places. And so we have to know how to show up for each other. And I think we're doing a pretty good job at that right now.
yeah,
And even to see, man, people in Belgium showing up around Black Lives Matter. I mean, no slight toward Belgium, but I didn't know that, you know, I mean,
yeah.
people just all over the world are stepping up. It's actually a beautiful thing to see that people are doing that.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree. I think one of the things that has just really rang true for me, specifically as it pertains to me and just all of my identities, right? Like, none of us are free until all of us are free, right? Whether that's
Mhm.
Black people, whether that's Latinx community, whether that's during this whole coronavirus time, there was a lot of just discrimination towards the Asian community. It
Mhm.
being Pride Month, our LGBTQ like students and people just in society, period. Until we all have the ability to live our full lives and for our lives to matter, what good is it for another group? We all have to work together, like for each other. So it was really beautiful for me to see, um, receiving text messages. Although I may not have responded, but like receiving the messages, receiving the emails, to know that like that support is there. So no, I totally agree.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
So the next point that I want to kind of end on before we go to questions. I know one of the things that you have really talked about is during this like COVID time of offices, schools, things being closed. This has kind of been like your freedom dreaming space, like your space of really dreaming about and planning and figuring out. Yes, like all of these things are true. These two pandemics, right? Like we've seen how healthcare and like all these things have failed our communities. Now, once again, it didn't go anywhere, but it's popped its head up again, right? When we think about just Black Lives Mattering and policing and all of these things, you've taken this time to really think about like how schools should be responding, how schools should be creating systems and policies and practices within their buildings to make sure that all of their students feel seen and affirmed. So curious, like how have you been using this time to think about schools?
yeah. There is some imagining space. I will say, like, I do recognize the responsibility of my team and me in the district to further support schools in this work, right? Like, if there's any group, man, that I would just, the way that principals and teachers have, this has been a tough year for people.
Yeah, yeah,
The way that people have been showing up, the level of coordination and sophistication around supporting our young people, and the way young people have been raising their voices extremely phenomenal. One of the a part of there's I still work a lot. Like I haven't sort of had rest
yeah,
time.
yeah,
And I had to buy a whiteboard for my house because and markers because I'm like I like to dream and imagine,
yeah,
sort of write out on the whiteboard. But when you think about what school should really be like to the article you spoke to, right? Like, what does it mean to really disrupt traditional schooling in service of young people having really sound opportunities to thrive? And how do we message that? And so I've been doing a lot of that work and thinking about here are all the different types of schools. Here's what the data is saying. While we're also working with many offices and departments and really doing a lot of the training around the CPS equity framework and how to use it and how to actually, because everybody's making decisions every day that will either perpetuate or disrupt, and we need to support people as an equity team. And so the amount of professional learning experiences that we have been providing have sort of been high because people are really asking, okay, Maurice, I know we were planning this for this time, but can we
yeah,
speed it up?
yeah,
And then, my team and I were involved in, we help to make decisions around where the laptop's going, who gets them first. And there are some other things that will come out soon in ways in which my team. So we actually have a cross-functional office. I meant to say this up front. Like, we don't only focus on schools. We look at we're in the finance space, the capital space,
yeah,
the budget. I mean, the capital budget space, and supports for schools. And I think my imagination. There are some tools that we've just created, some newer tools, because one of the things that helps people to access how to do it is having something that sort of guides them through. Um, and I've been specifically thinking about our high schools that have the most critical needs, as Tilden was one of them.
yeah,
And a part of what I've been doing is reaching out to just different people around the country and talking with other equity officers across in multiple cities as we're sort of creating our own equity community because our jobs are so unique. Like you're asked to be critical of the district that hired you, right? That's a little like people don't do that. And luckily, I have Dr. Jackson, who is very equity conscious and really wants to do this work for all students in the district.
yeah.
So I have that buffer, of having a boss that gives me space to be creative and help me to move actions along. I hope that answered your question. I felt like
Yeah.
I pivoted a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, definitely. So school year is about to end. Um, people are beginning to think about what does the fall look like? Like, is it happening? Is it not? What's going on? We won't talk about that. But I know on a call me and you had prior, we talked a little bit about what the first days, months of the school year starting back, it should not look like, right?
Yeah.
So curious for you to share that out with people. How do we, create space for healing, create space for students to really just grapple with like what just happened, like, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Helen Antonopoulos, the executive director of the Office of Social Emotional Learning, is working on something with some other people within the district. We have several teams that are really coming together around different topics, like instructional time and
yeah,
just many different ways of like how do we need to wrestle with ideas. And so I'm happy that we're creating teams to do that. What school cannot be, we cannot open school without addressing these things and creating conditions and healing spaces. And I actually think teachers need to heal too. Like
yeah,
we're all sort of carrying these heavy burdens and weights that we have to process. And so what it can, typically sometimes schools enter and it's like, here are all the things you need to do. Here are all the things you need to say. Here's where your locker is, which are very technical. And we need to make sure that it's very communal and collective, and that people are talking and that we help to create conditions and tools to have those conversations. So that is forthcoming. But the truth is we have to follow CDC's guidance. We have to pay attention to what the governor and the mayor are saying about like, is it safe to re-enter? And I will say that we want to make decisions through science because we don't have a vaccine, right? And so we know, Illinois is one of the few states that have met the federal criteria for reopening.
right,
Many people don't know that. Many states have not sort of met that criteria. And because our mayor and governor have had this sort of really hard lockdown and, I know many people were mad that, Mayor Lightfoot closed Lakeshore, but, we need to minimize the impact and we have to make sure that we follow things that will keep us safe because we already saw the communities that were impacted were disproportionately Black and brown. And so other people can be asymptomatic and still carry, that disease, that virus around.
yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree. I think one of the other things we have a meeting at the school where I work upcoming week, kind of just beginning to think through some different scenarios. And one of the things I shared was, we think about this sense of urgency. Like we've lost a lot of time. We need to jump in right away. Like we need to have Saturday school. We need to have this, have that, PSAT prep. Like, yes, those things are important, but with time, right? Like we need to create space first to deal with who is in front of us and what we all have experienced and gone through. And when we think about relationship building and building rapport with students, I think teachers entering into that space of vulnerability as well. Like 2020 kicked my butt. Like this was, like, and here are the ways. I feel like it creates this space to heal and build with one another.
Yeah, I think, there is a great desire for people to sort of get back into a traditional routine.
Yeah,
But when we think about inequities, all systems haven't worked for everybody. So we can't implement them back the same way that they were.
yeah,
And that is sort of where, when you talk earlier about my imagination, I'm trying to reimagine school, not just with the technical, here's what the time schedule should look like. Because I actually believe we might have learning loss, but we might have learning gains. Like we have to also maintain a degree of optimism. Like
right.
we can figure it out. We're not stupid, dumb, or crazy. We could figure out what it takes to actually do the right advancements if we slow down to use the time to think and process and bring communities in and talk to people about what their real needs are so that we can do the right co-design work necessary to advance the education that we need. So learning loss is a thing. I actually don't like the term. I don't use it a lot. I'm tired of deficit-based language. So true or not, I just don't like it. So I don't use it.
No, I agree. Cool. All right, let's go to some questions. Let me
Sure.
see. Um, Everyone's really excited to see you.
Good to see you, whoever you are. I'm
uh,
purposely not on Facebook because I don't want to pay attention to Facebook.
cool. Okay, we have, and this is a broad question, but from Daryl Diggs. He says, "What policies do school districts need to put in place to address inclusion, diversity, and equity? And are these policies that are you're developing, like they're already there, but like what do those policies look like?"
Yeah, so there, we've just done a scan of racial equity policies across districts to really, really understand. Because a lot of what we've seen with racial equity policies, for example, is that people write them and then there's no money and no sort of political will that seems to have advanced with the policies that ask for. It's like having a consent decree and not doing it, right? Like it's like, how do we actually? So what we've done is in our policy review process, one of the things that we've said, we have to engage stakeholders in that process. I will say, what I think might get at the question a little bit is that we have to examine all policies through an equity lens, and we have to look at what has been the impact of that policy to date. And that sort of helps us to know, if you look at a policy's outcome and you see racialized outcomes, then the policy has to be revised.
Right. Right.
And not all at one time, because we also have to be careful or be thoughtful around the interconnecting of policies. But we are looking at, right now CPS has a multicultural policy, and we're looking at that and potentially going to do something with that soon, bring it through a revision.
Cool, cool. One of the things I really liked about your framework presentation, and I'm sure it's written in there somewhere, that equity is kind of an ongoing process. It's not like, oh, we've reached it, right? Like it's constantly looking at policies, constantly looking at rules and guidelines, and tinkering them as needed, because it's not a destination, right?
Yeah, one of the things that we revised in the framework to get to that point was we said equity is a process, initiative, and outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Like how you do what you do on an ongoing basis. And we've spent a lot of time really helping to develop people's lens around equity. It's the initiative. So when we say, we're increasing AP and IB programs or CTE programs or whatever programs that we are doing through the ARA, right? That we have to make sure that they're going to places that need more opportunity for their young people, to the point you described earlier. And then outcomes, that do we see the outcomes change? Yes or no? Yes, keep doing it. No, pause, figure it out, and do something different.
Right. Next question is Antonio Hardiman. How do we connect your department into the inequitable issues of justice? I'm assuming he means like kind of, justice, probably. Also, what are your thoughts on SROs? I'm not sure what SROs are. I'm hoping
School
you do.
resource officers. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So the first question, the education system is always always should be connected to justice issues, and that's one of the reasons why we did the revision to do to advance racial justice in the framework itself. The second part around SROs, what I will say is that I think we need to keep having the conversation with youth voice at the table. I won't get into all the politics about what I believe. I mean, people who know me know I have a strong stance on multiple things. But one of the things I really believe when I talk about reimagining school, we have to do that with young people at the table.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know any other way, because we could make multiple decisions that we think are in the best interest of them and not having them at the table and then make the wrong choice.
Yeah.
Whether you believe that school resource officers should be in school or not. And for me, I stay out of the debate to some degree, but I really think I'm really trying to increase youth voice. And so I want to do some more engagement around talking with young people around what does it mean for them to be safe in their schools, which is a different question than the one I think we're actually sometimes talking about.
Yeah. Rob
Probably already knows. I think I know who that is.
Uh, Robert Amy just asked, is the equity framework available online?
Yep, cps.edu/equity framework. So cps.edu/equity framework. Or if you Google CPS equity framework, it should bring you to the page that you can have the draft link.
Another question from Antonio. It's a question I often had too around this framework. Is it up to principals to implement? How does this get into schools? How does this how does this get through funding? How does this get into programming and all these things? Is it up to the principal, or are you engaging with folks kind of at each level of the school function?
We're engaging at each level. So we've shared and have been in probably 95% of the principal spaces first. Because when we talk about equity as a process, like we have to figure out, well, we have to do more engagement with young people in their schools. We have to figure out what's the right, it's a process, is what I will say. It's not something like, oh, now go do this and you get the result. We're actually asking people to change their mind and their belief systems. But it's an ongoing learning journey, and the Office of Equity is supporting with developing people at the district level and the school level. So we did a round of engagement with principals, and there are some other learning opportunities that will come after the school year ends.
Cool.
And there are tools to support implementation. So, a framework gives you, okay, here's the infrastructure, and that was extremely important. And now here are tools to help access some of the information. And like when we look at budget, one of the reasons why we created equity grants is because resource equity is an issue. And so how do we make sure we're investing in schools that have been underserved?
Yeah. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I don't know. We talked with David Johns, who was the executive director for African American Advancement Education, something something, in the Obama administration. Right, dope guy, love him to death. One of the things he talked about was teachers who give pushback, teachers who are like, yeah, I don't get it, I don't understand it. I'm gonna just do what I do. And he talked about the importance of pushing them out, right? Like they don't need to be here. If you are not here to affirm, see, believe, and develop in every student where they are, then like you should not be um, in this field. What is your how have you all met kind of like resistance in that way? Or better yet, that's not the question I want to ask. I kind of forgot for a minute. But the question I want to ask is accountability. What accountability measures are in place to ensure that the framework that's being created is being implemented? Is there like kind of, I don't know, reward structures? How does that look in your mind?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So one of the things that I stay away from at the moment is like rushing to accountability and not rushing to learning.
Okay.
Like in the same way that we say we want young people to learn and to thrive, we have to center learning for adults. Each of us comes to the space from multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
And I think schools and teachers actually want to tackle some of the tough issues. And that's one of the reasons why we have some tools and some other supports coming to people once the school year ends to help do further engagement. I believe in the power of the principalship, and I believe in the power of teacher leaders. Going back to collectivist culture, I think that if we get the right people in the room to have the right conversations at the school level, change can happen.
Yeah.
And here's one of the transformative things that happened for me as a principal. We had young people do an in-school field trip, and they basically, for the full day, we chose students who were like your super high A+ students and students who had D's and F's. And we brought them to do a roundtable discussion with every group of teachers in that day. And people learned a lot about how we saw them and how we didn't see them, and how we were biased toward them, and where opportunities we caused them to shine. That was one of the most transformative things, because people sometimes don't even realize the practices that they're upholding. And I think if a teacher doesn't want to be there, first of all, I don't know if I can assess more broadly if a teacher wants to be there or not. I think we should, if there are, I think we have to position that differently. I think we have to position it around learning.
Mhm.
I'm a big advocate of helping to grow and develop people. I don't know if that's the teacher or the instructional coach in me, but believing that people came to this profession because they wanted to do good
Yeah.
or to do well. And we sometimes have to figure out, when did it turn for you that you became bitter? And there's a difference between being angry and being bitter. Dr. Maya Angelou talks about that. But like, how do we help people sort of crack open what is it that is paining you or hurt you that causes you to show up this way? And then now, how do we help you to show up in a different way?
I like that. Last question is, what are the ways that you engage stakeholders in co-creating your equity agenda, and how can folks get plugged in to support? And that's from Tina Zayas. We spoke with her last week or 2 weeks ago.
Got it. We engaged at least 3,000 stakeholders, whether it was parents, students, teachers, administrators, philanthropic community. Like, building the framework was a beautiful and hard task. I think partly because I was finishing my dissertation at the same time. So I was always in like this thinking and designing space.
Yeah.
I say, to get plugged in the equity agenda, I would wonder where you are now, and then how do you advance the framework in your space. So we have been meeting with some CBOs, for example, to help push the equity framework. For example, there are some organizations that say, you know, the students we serve, you have to have a 2.5 GPA or above. And I'm asking, is that real equity? Who are we missing when we have these larger criteria, right? So everybody's being pushed. I think it's important to pick up the framework, wrestle with it, understand the concepts, and then see how you advance it in your own space. And then if you want to know more, I would just probably say email me.
Cool. And what's your email?
I'm not putting that on Facebook. No. Equity@cps.edu is the easiest way.
There we
go. Yeah.
There we go. Love it.
No, but I think to get plugged in all serious, that yes, emailing is one way. And then I think really, I have been pushing everyone including myself, who says that I'm here for equity and justice, on their mirror work. Are you upholding or disrupting systematic oppression? Am I? And in some ways I had to recognize, Maurice, you got to change. You got to unlearn. You got to stop doing that.
Yep.
And so I know people want to do, and I'm asking people to think, feel, and believe for just a little while longer, which means that we have to pick up this thing, for example, or this book or whatever other book, and just really be a consumer, so that you even know how to talk about it when you're in other spaces.
Yeah.
That is how I think we disrupt. Because I avoid, and not avoid, but sometimes I don't want to do the initiative. I want to do the process that actually changes the thing long term, and not just say, oh, we need to do this, and it sounds like a bright idea, and then it doesn't get to the intention.
That's so funny you mentioned that. Like, I think it's a different place to be in. I think oftentimes I'm kind of like okay, so what does this mean? Like, so what does this look like? How are we evaluating it? What are the plans? Like, how do we make this happen? And being able to sit in a space where you're able to like just think, feel, it is very uncomfortable, because I think oftentimes it begins to highlight for you some of the things and areas that it's like, oh, like, well, maybe that's me. Like, maybe I need to like think about that more.
Yeah, and I would say, if you were to ask yourself that question in the mirror, like, I love Issa Rae, right? I love when she does these monologues in the mirror, but she's actually she's negotiating space with herself and coming to some conclusions, right? I actually want to use some of her clips in professional learning, because what she's doing is having these controversial, multi-dimensional, intersectional conversations with herself. And so when you say, how do we evaluate this? What if you ask yourself, how do we evaluate this? You might actually come to the conclusion that you need on how to evaluate it in your space, which might be different from mine.
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to sort of That's one of the reasons why we took out a part of the framework and didn't push it all out, because the companion guide is a lot more about doing. It'll tell you, here's what to look for to know if you're going
Yeah.
in a certain direction. And I really just said we got to avoid that, because if not, we'll keep doing initiatives and not sort of interrupting the way in which we do everyday work.
Oh, love that. Love that. I think this was a very fruitful conversation. I mean, from really thinking about how as teachers or people in schools, how we oftentimes have to like look at ourselves. I love the analogy of like the mirror and window. Definitely going to like utilize that.
Hmm.
And then like even thinking about how we in times like these hold white folks accountable to do their own learning, doing their work, and not always, in addition to the stress of the time, having to now begin to like find these articles, find these books, like you should read this, you should read that, because I think oftentimes that's the place that we get put in and become this like de facto DEI coordinator, not getting paid for it. Number one, it's like on top of like everything else that you do. But no, definitely appreciative for the work that you're doing in CPS.
Which, can I say one thing to that?
Yeah, yeah,
Which
yeah,
means if you keep doing that, then you are always doing and not thinking, feeling, and believing.
yeah.
So I'm a big fan of Dr. Glenn Singleton's work, Courageous Conversations,
Hmm.
and it has really pushed my to your point about imagination. What I have found was sometimes I was looking at my calendar and I was like, where is my time to imagine?
Hmm.
Where is my time to read? Where is my time to think? Like there is no prize for always acting. There is a reward. And you know what? So many organizations, so many people out there doing so much great work with supporting students and families in addition to what CPS is doing, you know what I'm saying? And it's a beautiful thing to see, but I never want myself. I know I become a bad spirited person when I don't have that time.
Hmm.
Um, and I know it, my friends know it, people can pick up on it. They're like, you are cranky. And that's because I didn't have time to breathe. And so I think that that's important too,
Yeah,
to have time to breathe. And also, if there's one sort of final plug that I can do,
yeah,
we have got to listen to young people, because they are speaking loud and clear in multiple spaces, on multiple fronts, on multiple issues.
yeah.
They are speaking to us, and we need to make sure that we're always listening. And I don't just mean as a district, I mean for every organization out there, for those who are employers of young people, they are talking to us, and we better be listening
Yeah,
intently,
yeah, definitely.
including me.
Yes. And oftentimes it's like, oh, it's just gonna like prolong, like we just gotta get this done. Like it's like I love the part you said like equity is the process, the say that one more time.
Process, initiatives, and outcomes.
Right. If you don't lead with it, if you're not planning with equity, how is your outcomes going to equal that? Right? Like
Yeah.
it's not just gonna like by happenstance be an equitable situation.
If we go to a restaurant and people bring you food that you didn't want, are you going to always eat it? Probably not.
Right, right.
So why do we think we could do that to our children?
Yep. Yep, yep, yep.
To just expect them to want to consume what we give them. That's not right.
And it
And
doesn't
I'm working on my own. I have to do better.
yeah,
Like I can always say, y'all have to do better, but Maurice has got to constantly do better.
yeah. And it doesn't set them up for to it doesn't give them the tools that they need to be able to be critical thinkers, to be leaders, to be able to have the tools and skills to challenge, to push, and to speak up, right? And we talked a little about that in our last conversation as teachers and as school leaders and people building systems and practices. We have to figure out ways that allow students to have that space, so
Yeah.
that when they are out in college or whatever they decide to do afterwards, we have developed leaders. Like we have developed people who know what they believe in, they know their values, they are able to speak truth to power. And we can't let that die with like us, like, oh, we know all the information. Like, we have to create that space. So thank you for saying.
Yeah. we're not living their experience. They're living their experience.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. I mean, I like you said at the beginning, this conversation really was helpful for me, and
Mhm.
definitely is going to be a highlight of this week. Just being able to create spaces for us to dream, imagine, and see things differently. Similar to what you were saying, this has definitely been that for me. You find yourself doing the same thing over and over, like, oh, this is going to work, this is great. And then, bam, COVID hits. It's like, oh my God, like, okay, we got to rethink and replan what we're doing. But I think it forces us to think intentionally about all the things that we should have been thinking about before. Like, how is this program going to impact students who have access to internet, those who don't, those who
Mhm.
have access to other like resources, and how do we create a space that's like um, beneficial and rewarding for all students? So thank you so much for leading this work. Thank you for for joining me here today.
Thank you
Really,
for having me. Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Antonia. It just clicked in my head. Sometimes I don't remember like last names, and it's like Antonia.
got you.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Yeah, man, and thank you for the work that you're doing with young people. And please continue to like push all of us. You know what I'm saying? All of us are moving to a more equitable district, and a more equitable system. And I believe, I actually want to, I always want to write an article, but we have so many strong Black female leads right now in the city across organizations. It's so beautiful,
Yeah,
and it's just a great opportunity, to figure this out. So, and to everybody else, just keep going.
yep. Stick around
All
real quick. I'm gonna close it out real fast.
right.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. I hope that you guys got just as much as I did from this conversation. Um, continue to, as we go through this time and as we begin to build, um, really look at yourself and figure out what are the ways in which like you are upholding um, things and like practices and beliefs that are based on white supremacy, like your privilege, that doesn't necessarily benefit those that you serve. And then, too, the last thing I'll end on is always keeping students' voice centered. Although we may feel as if we know everything and we can build this amazing program and we know exactly what students need, as Maurice said, like they're living in their experience right now, and they can better tell us what they need as opposed to us always just giving them things. So thank you all so much. Join us next week as we close out Keeping It 110, our summer series, or it wasn't summer because summer's just beginning, but our COVID series, if you will. We're going to end next week with Robert J. Hendricks. He's the executive director of the He Is Me Institute, an organization that works to support Black male educators in Boston. And then my good friend Tamisha Webb, who is an ed consultant in Boston, as well as an assistant principal at a charter school there. So thank y'all so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you right back here, same time, same place. Be safe.